Yeah. All right, good day and welcome to another edition of a Google Plus Hangout for our channel's beam. Today we're looking at the budget, or the draft budget that was submitted to the House of, well, the Senate actually, a joint session of the Senate by President Muhammadu Buhari. And joining me to look at this, we have Chambers, Umezulike. He joins us from Abuja, Nigeria's federal capital. Thanks for coming on the program.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And we also have Hamzat Lawal. He is from Connected Development. Thanks for coming on the program as well.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And then we have Morad Deyo Onamusi. He's calling us from Canada. Thanks as well for coming on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Well, you seem to be the odd one at the moment. You're not in Nigeria, and again, you're not in Abuja, even if you were in Nigeria. So set the ball rolling. What is your overall assessment of the 2017 draft budget?
Yeah, so I have a very optimistic perspective about it because it's considerably larger than last year's one, and so it goes on to show that we have there's more focus in capital recapitalization, and yeah, the proceedings are really interesting and attractive. But my only issue with it is a lot of these budget proceedings are really, they're meant for the people, the general populace, and for everyone to be able to appreciate it, everybody needs to understand it. And it goes down to what I feel about how government doesn't communicate well to the general populace. It's a lot of mouthful grammar, statutory transfers, things that the general layman would not know. And, you know, I think the general populace needs to understand these things in language that they understand so that they can support the government, because government can't just do this alone. They can't do this. They can't just say, government, we have 7.3 trillion naira in the budget, and that it doesn't end there. People have to also, you know, support it.
All right, Beryl, I'll come back to you in just a minute. But before we continue, Atiku Samuel joins us. He is from Budget, I beg your pardon. Thanks for coming to the program, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Yeah, but then you're looking very dark. We can't really see your face, and our viewers also on YouTube can't really see you. So if you increase the light or probably perhaps change your position, that would do us a lot of good.
Let me just do that. Yeah.
All right. So while you do that, let me just come back to you, Chambers. While Moradeo was talking, I could see you were nodding your head, but then I'm not really sure as to why you were doing that. So I guess let me just come to you to get your own perspective. Do you concur with what he said, or you have a different view?
Comment on the budget on process and content. On process, 2016 budget performance is so poor. Around 42% of the capital vote has been released so far. That's around 753 billion naira. And based on that, most of the capital items on the 2016 budget are still at their contracting stage. So it baffles one how the government intends to manage the 2016 spillover in 2017. Also, you being mindful of the fact that while the government was preparing the 2017 budget, at the same time, they were still releasing funds for some capital items on the 2016 one. So there might be some capital items on the 2016 one that might not later get funds for and wouldn't reflect on the 2017 one. Then based on content, you're planning next year based on 305 to $1. That's actually not realistic. You have a deficit of around 2-point-something trillion naira. Who is going to lend you money based on that forex rate calculation? Then also you have the capital component of the budget still at 30%, just around 2-point-something trillion. Yeah, that's so nanoscopic to what we actually need to stimulate the economy. Then you're also planning next year, you have, I think, 2.2 million barrels per day oil production rate, and you still have the crisis in the Niger Delta, the oil pipeline vandalization, and you know that actually affected our revenues realization in 2016. So how are we sure that that won't actually factor in in 2017. But there are actually some positive notes, such as the recapitalization of the Banks of Industry and Agriculture to be able to encourage SMEs and MSMEs. Then also, we also have plans on establishing export promotion zones and special economic zones. And also the government is also planning based on $42 per barrel towards next year. That's a little bit realistic if OPEC could actually cut down on, still cut down on production like they're doing now.
All right, very well. We'll come back to you also on that. But then, Hamza, let's also quickly get your perspective before we go further with this discussion.
Well, as much as the budget seems exciting and ambitious,
I think we've not learned our lessons because
we're
the budget on funds from our crude oil exploration. You know, I'm not one of those people who is happy that, you know, the international market for crude oil price is getting higher because we've not learned our lessons. The world is looking at cleaner energy investment. The world is looking at internally generated revenue that sustains the economy. The world is also looking at direct foreign investment that is leveraged on our parallel markets. But today, we have about 5 trends to follow. There is no strong regulations. You know, today the dollar is at a very disheartening rate. Tomorrow, it's just up and down. And our budget, when you look at the funding for our budget on this crude oil, then again, looking at how we can sustain the economy, knowing that we're still in recession. And it's quite sad that 2016 budget was tagged a budget of change. But then there's no specific in terms of how much has been released in funding 2016 capital expenditures. And even the figures we have out there, there are no breakdowns of it. And how has this money been utilized? And how has the ordinary man on the street actually felt the impact? Because as much as we talk about government, I think we should now move forward to talk, because the budgetary process itself is not encompassing. There is no concrete engagement between citizens, civil society, traditional rulers, and people at the grassroots. So there's that disconnect between the government and the people that are meant to benefit from the budget.
All right, very well. I think Morade said something about that disconnect earlier on, but then Atiku is back. Quite a lot, some amount of water has gone on the bridge while we were trying to sort out light issues, but then gladly you're back and the light is on point. But I think we should just move on forward now with the budget issue. The government has already made its intentions clear as to what it is spending this money in the budget, if approved, of course. But how justifiable is the spending list?
Well, the budget is the justification for the spending itself is funny. That's just one angle to it. We all know the budget is actually divided into 3 broad classifications. We know we have the revenue angle, which arms that actually knocked.
If you can lean back a bit, that'll be fine.
Okay, better.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's better now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the budget is actually having 3 broad classifications. You have the revenue angle. Sure, that's how much they plan to spend, and more importantly, how they plan to finance the deficit itself, since you are running a deficit budget, not a surplus budget or a balanced budget. If we look at the revenue angle, the projections are just funny. I'll give you just one example. Last year, recovery from looted funds, recoveries, loots in quote, was an deficit finance last year. But this year it has been moved as a revenue. That's funny. Number one, this money has already been recognized as revenue formally. As such, if we are recognizing as revenue in accounting, they call it double counting. And that's actually flawed. And there's no two way about it. If we go back to the Fiscal Responsibility Act, it says Nigeria can only borrow. We can only run a deficit of about 3% of our annual gross domestic product, our GDP, is about 96 trillion. If we look at 3% of 96 trillion, you discover it's about 2-point-something trillion. Roughly about 2-point-something trillion. So for everything to look good, the government actually moved a very big component of the budget, about 500 billion that they're expecting from corrupt officials. They moved it under revenue, which is totally flawed. Accounting-wise, it's totally not there. So again, if you look at the revenue projections, last year we missed it gallantly, and the president admitted as such. When he was making his speech, that the revenue projection was just totally out of it. CIT, that's the corporate income tax projections, was very terrible. Projections was out of it. People were not buying. The economy is recessing. And then more importantly, we know we have issues around currencies. And then we're having big crises. Trade flow has not been, revenue that we're expecting from the port is not even forthcoming because we have currency issues. So on the back of that currency projections, we've not solved some of those critical problems. And then we are making projections into the year based on that revenue. And the revenue we're expecting from these things is what fits into the expenditure. Now, if we go to the expenditure, there's still no clear-cut direction as to what government intends to do. I'll give you a good example. The president was emphasizing agriculture. If you look at the agricultural budget, there are 41 agencies under Ministry of Agriculture. Funny enough, 18 out of that agency are doing something. All they're doing is just running institute that teach people how to farm, which should have been easily moved under Ministry of Education. Another 19 agencies also doing research and development, Ministry of Science and Technology. In clear cut, the Ministry of Agriculture itself is only running maybe with about 4 agencies that is doing the core work that it should be doing. So we see that there's been a disconnect between the mandate of the minister and then itself, the ministry, compared to what's happening, what's underlying those ministries. That's just one part of it. So really, the government has actually not adjusted. The problems we had last year, the problems we complained about, series of memos that we wrote to the government in private, the ones that we talked about in public, none has actually, there's no effect. If you look at this year's budget, I'll call it a disaster. We're spending 7.3 trillion with no clear-cut direction. The second angle I also want to pick up is this, the recurrent component of that budget. The recurrent component of that budget last year was about roughly about 4.5, if I'm not missing the mark, about 4.5 trillion naira. It has actually jumped above 5 trillion this year. 2 years ago, that money was, the recurring component was about 3.5. So effectively, we are growing recurring expenditure by a factor of about 1 trillion every year. And the concept of government is to cut down costs, rein down costs, and push this fund into infrastructure development. But again, we are not doing that. Last year, we did not do it. This year, we continue on this wide jamboree of doing absolutely nothing. Beyond all these things, again, if you look at the numbers clearly, if you look at the revenue projections itself, there's still no detailed breakdown as to where this money is coming from. Independent revenue source of federal government. Roughly about, we're just making projections, but where would this money come from? Nobody's actually telling us in detail. So I think that's the first big flaw that we quickly like to identify.
All right, that was a long one by Atiku, but then, well, he said a lot of things. He also called the budget a disaster. Well, that's according to him. But Hamza, let's look at the line items. How pleased or how do you feel about the line items? Let me put it that way. Hamza.
On the breakdown of the budget, it's just not until less than the details were published, which is another flaw of the government, because you're presenting a budget and you're not making it available online, easily available online for citizens. So we're still analyzing and looking at specifics in the budget. But just to streamline quickly to the Ministry of Health, there's been an increase in terms of percentage in their capital expenditures, which is exciting. But then if we look at the National Health Act, we're still not implementing what it's stipulated in the National Health Act. And then let's also look at what was budgeted for Ministry of Health in 2016. And I remember during the town hall meeting when we threw a question to the Minister of Budget and Planning, the implementation of 2016 budget is going to spill over to May 2017. Then we wonder when would they kickstart the process of implementing 2017, and how are we able to mainstream this budget implementation together. So it's a bit confusing and worrisome. Health again. $500 million was given to Nigeria from the World Bank, and these funds was credit, which means we have to pay over time as stipulated in the contract. But then $1.5 million was granted to the 36 state governors and the FCT. But let me put this into Naira perspective. This is over 400 million Naira to help them enhance primary healthcare service delivery in rural communities. But as I speak to you now, there's a bit of controversy here. Some states are claiming that they have not received these funds, while some other states are saying they've received, but they are now in the process of awarding contracts for implementation. And this is meant to be done in 2016. And here we're in December, we're rounding up this year, and nothing has happened in terms of implementation. Probably before we end this discussion, over 200 children would have died across the country because we've not been able to provide them access to quality healthcare services in rural communities.
Well, that would be very sad if it indeed happens. But then earlier on, you made mention of the benchmark, and also Atiku also spoke about it. But then, how realizable? Because he kept asking one question: where is the money coming from? How realizable is the benchmark?
Well, my brother, I think we're not living in the reality of today, because what's happening now is mostly double taxation. And you pay local government tax, and again, you don't know what this tax is being used for. I've been to Lagos a couple of times, and you see you have to pay the Lagos state government tax, and then you pay federal government tax. There's no streamline in terms of revenue intake in country. And of course, just a couple of weeks ago, we're debating about the increase in data tariff, and not to also talk about the percentage increase in both liquid and solid waste. So there's a lot of citizens. But what is key here is, even if we pay all of this money that we don't have as citizens, how realistic is it that we'll get better service delivery? And how would this infuse and inform the implementation of the budget that is not realistic and in tune with what we have of today?
I will come back to you again just in a moment. But then, Chambers, you have also been around for a while. But let's take a look at complaints. I saw a lot of complaints about how much the education system, has gotten. A lot of people feel it is somewhere down below. Do you agree with that feeling?
Yeah, I agree quite well. I think it's actually still below the UNESCO benchmark of 26% of the total budget going into education. But at the same time, there's actually another reality. The government has been so much fixated on the fact that once you just inject money into the economy, recession will disappear. Once you just inject money into a sector, you get miracles and all that. But that's not quite realistic. There are actually some kind of structural reforms that most of all these sectors actually need. Taking education for an example, to me, there is no amount of money you are going to put into that sector and achieve results. Because the problem is actually very, very systematic. You looking at the kind of curriculum we're still using, looking at issues of exam malpractices, students sorting lecturers and all that. These are actually underlying issues. Lecturers are not teaching again. They don't go for their classes again. And most of all these kind of issues we have in the educational sector. So that actually has to be addressed. Then look at public primary schools, secondary schools. Nobody goes to them again. Yeah, because you can't get quality there. Everyone is trooping to private primary schools and secondary schools. So these kind of reforms are actually needed before you can get most of all these sectors working. But the allocation is actually still low, and there should be improvements on that.
All right. Well, which other sector do you think should have gotten more than it got?
Yeah, still health, for an example. I think for health, it's still below 15% of the Abuja Declaration. Yeah, that is still quite low. I think power, housing, and walls got around 500 billion, followed by translation and all that. But look at the whole capital vote, for an example. That's just around $4 billion. Honestly, we're actually a very, very poor country. President-elect Trump has plans to actually put around $600 billion into just infrastructure. And every single stuff we're actually working on is just around $4 billion in terms of capital expenditure. Like I said initially, it is actually so nanoscopic to actually what we need to stimulate the economy. It's still very, very low. There should be improvement. Lagos is doing 40-60 recurrent and capital 40, recurrent 60. Why are we still doing 30? Why are we just paying salaries with the budget and doing overhead? Look at the appropriations in State House. Yeah, I saw them, a lot of exaggerations by 250%, 200% increment from the 2016 one. And that's actually part of the stuff that actually contributed to the deficit that we have. We have to actually cut down on all those unnecessary expenditure and reform the civil service, and also put more money into budgetary processes so that the capital component can actually start getting reasonable votes.
All right, Beryl, I'll come back to you in just a minute, but then Atiku, let me also come to you again. You talked earlier on about having the recurrent expenditure growing over and over time instead of putting the money somewhere else. Let me just get a quote from the president's speech where he talked about reducing costs. Now let me quote him. He says, "Our efforts on cost containment have continued throughout the year. We have restricted travel costs, reduced board member sitting allowances, converted forfeited properties to government offices to save on rent, and eliminated thousands of ghost workers. These and many other cost reduction measures will lead to savings of close to 180 billion naira per annum to be applied to critical areas, including health, security, and education." But one thing that I think that's a good step, I think is a step in the right direction, if indeed that has happened, because I haven't confirmed that. But also another thing that caught my attention is you making mention of the fact that the recurrent expenditure keeps growing every year, from 2015 to 2016, and again from 2016 to 2017. Why is it recurrent? Why is it a recurrent decimal in our budget processing every year?
Number one, we have to look at the recurrent component. We have the debt part. The cost of servicing debt is accelerating at the speed of light. I think we are getting close to 17%. And to put it in context, I think was it on Monday that the central bank was trying to borrow about 80 billion from investors in Nigeria for the federal government. Incidentally, only 14 billion was raised. That shows the level of confidence, how the level of confidence actually plummeted under this government. The truth is that the investors are not careful. And if government had to get this debt, they have to get at extremely high lending rates. And that's putting enormous pressure on revenue itself. I mean, if you look at this year's, we're looking at about 1.6 trillion. If you go back 4 years ago, it was just barely 600 billion. So we've actually moved from about 600 billion, 6 trillion in less than 4 years in terms of debt servicing. That's one component of it. Now the president talks about reining down on personnel costs. We all know that personnel costs has many divisions. The salaries is just one part of it. We have what they call insurance, which we call the NHIS, National Health Insurance Scheme, that they do for virtually all government workers, the police, the army. When we talk, the civil service itself is just less than 100,000. But when you begin to bring in the police, teachers, the army, you begin to bring in a lot of things into it, then we get close to about 2 million or thereabout. The truth is that we don't even have the statistics. FOI have been sent to the regards of, let's even know the total number of the workforce itself under federal government payroll, where the government has refused to publish that, make that public. So let's just put that aside. But unfortunately, the personnel cost of government has been going up. Let's look at the numbers closely. It has been going up. It's one thing to talk about raining down on ghost workers. Another thing for you to look at the fine lines and look at the numbers. The personnel cost has been going up. That's just one. And we have to understand also that the president made some wide promises during the campaign period. And now recently, you must have been hearing about the Empower project, bringing in a lot of youth. All those ones are adding up. Although, if you look at the budget as it were today, they've carefully removed it and placed it under what you call special intervention project. But really, it's just a big component of that money is going under personnel cost itself. So personnel cost is going up. If you look at the overheads of government, it's also going up. It's growing by 2 billion. And that's actually understandable. We understand that the cost of virtually everything is jumping up, from the cost of fueling, utility bills, water bills. But funny enough, if you look at the line items of some agencies and you compare with what's happening at the presidency, if you look at the breakdown, you'll be so shocked to what degree the utility bill of the president has actually jumped up. That shows clearly there's still something fishy going on within that budget line items. Although we thank God, at least for the first time, some agencies are actually coming out, heads of agencies, to publicly defend their budget. But reality is that if you look at the line item, compared with last year, growth in utility, how astronomical it has actually jumped. For some ministries, while for some, it has actually come down, especially for those ones that are not very close to the presidency. Away from that, the real cost of governance in Nigeria will certainly go up. If we look at the money itself and we try to turn it down, we use inflation deflate. I mean, we use implicit deflator to actually call it down. We discovered that in reality, what 1 naira can buy last year, 1 naira cannot buy this year. 1 naira can buy this last year, 1 naira cannot buy this year, and that fits into our recurrent component. And the reason why we're having that is because we've not had a firm grip. We've not had a firm grip on our monetary policy system. The executive had been very funny in dealing with the with the central bank itself, which should be a monetary authority. So at the end of the day, if you look at the annual reports, the monthly annual report of the central bank, it should be shocked. It's so shocking. Economical expansion in their balance sheet of the central bank. The balance sheet of the central bank has actually expanded. And if you look at the biggest component, is actually investment in federal government security. Effectively, what I'm saying is that the federal government, the central bank, is actually printing money, fueling up inflation, causing inflation within the society to bail out the federal government. So whether we like it or not, a combination of poor planning, bad monetary, and terrible, in fact, bad is actually an understatement, terrible monetary policy system, and more importantly, lack of cohesion. That's actually the critical point. If you look at the United States, virtually all agencies, the utility bill is not paid by the agency. The utility bill of every agency in the United States is under a unit that controls virtually everything. So that I don't go deep into some of these components, the truth is that we had lack of cohesion, deep, bad, and terrible monetary policy system, and more importantly, poor planning phase that's actually feeding into all these things.
All right, Beryl, we're running out of time now. I think we should start wrapping up. Moradeo hasn't come back to join us since he left, but then Hamzat, let me just come to you to give us just in closing, your closing statement. Hold on a bit, please. All right, go ahead.
The president has submitted the proposed budget. Now it's left for the National Assembly to debate this budget. In the past, we've had closed door session where government MDAs defend their budgets, where citizens and civil society were locked out of this meeting. We're hoping that moving forward, and it has been promised by the leadership of the National Assembly that they would have an open door policy where when MDAs defend their budgets, civil society and citizens would be there to observe and also contribute to the process. We hope this happens. But then let's look at the not legitimacy of the National Assembly to undertake this. Let's look at the moral side of it, and let's also look at the transparency and accountability implication. Itself has not been able to provide the budgetary breakdown for 2016 appropriation that they got. And we all know that in the 2017 budget, they would actually get over 20% of the budget. And we've not gotten breakdown of 2016, not to even speak of the proposed appropriations. So there's a fine thin line here, transparency and accountability implication, and then the moral obligation by our policymakers.
All right, thank you very much, Hamza, to join us from Nigeria's federal capital. But Chambers, let's also get your closing statement before we go.
I don't really want us to cover the 2016 budget.
Sorry, come again.
Yeah, just like I said initially, I don't want us to actually cover the 2016 budget implementation with a blanket. is actually a proviso according to the Fiscal Responsibility Act that before you present a new budget, that you should do a proper analysis of the former one, and we didn't see that. Then I think the government should actually harmonize all the forest rates that we have. You can't attract any investor based on those forest rates, and actually helping to skyrocket inflation. I also think that the government should effectively implement its plans on export promotion zones, establishing export promotion zones and special economic zones. And also, I think that the government should actually be an increased attempt to attract foreign investors. But foreign investors cannot come when you cannot even maintain a stable macroeconomic environment. So the government there should be proper harmonization or coherency between the Ministry of Finance and the central bank, so that we can be able to start attracting foreign capital, so that the economy can also stabilize. Then also, finally, we actually demand for increased transparency, accountability, and citizen engagement in the implementation of the 2017 budget, whenever that is going to start. Thank you so much.
All right. Again, just before we go, Morade actually just got back, but then you should have a few words to say just before we close. Let's get that at least.
Yes. My opinion, even though I may sound like I don't have the voice of the people, and I'm more about the government, because I support what the government is trying to do. It's a difficult task. I know governance from my experience. I know governance is pretty tough. The people just need to try as much as possible to support the government as well. Government in itself too should try and carry the people along in ways that they will understand, not the complex ways. And we just need to remain optimistic about the economic situation. I know it's hard because I'm in Canada right now. It's hard for people in Nigeria to understand what I'm saying, but I see these things. I see that even the Western nations, they also go through terrible situations in their economies. It's not just us, and they always face it with optimism. That's why they're always able to get out of it. So we just need to keep being optimistic, and it will get better. Then Hamza also mentioned something about the world shifting to other forms of operation, like other ways of running their economies, especially the way we rely so much on oil. And I understand that it is very, very necessary we start shifting our reliance on oil to other forms of energy. And I actually support that. But I can also understand that it will take some time for this to happen. It can't just happen overnight. We have to still use what we have, which is our oil, our fossil industry, to at least maintain some balance. And I also like to see some sustainability and strategic divestment. Maybe they say in 3 or 4 years or 5 years or whatever, just have a strategic divestment plan that, okay, we want to shift away from this our current reliance. So I remain optimistic about it, as long as the government also keeps doing their job. People should also do their best to support the government. That's my own take.
All right. Thank you very much, Morade Onamusi. You joined us from Canada. Thank you, sir, for coming on board. It's been a pleasure. Hamza, you joined us from Abuja, Nigeria Federal Capital. Thank you, sir, for coming on board. And Chambers Umezulike, thank you, sir, for coming as well. You joined us again from Nigeria's Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. It seems Abuja is taking the day. And also Atiku Lloyd, well, you are here in Lagos, Nigeria. Thanks as well for joining this conversation. But then that's where we'll wrap it up on this edition of the program. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Victor Matthias, and of course, we do acknowledge those of you that were watching via our YouTube channel. Sorry we couldn't take a couple of your comments, but then I guess we'll take those comments while we're broadcasting this conversation on television. It's a Google Plus Hangout for Channel Speed. Goodbye.
Thank you.